The warrior king was a name spoken with reverence across the galaxy, a leader forged in the crucible of countless battles. His imposing stature, marked by scars that whispered tales of wars fought and victories hard won, symbolized his unwavering commitment to honor and duty. His people, once proud and unyielding, had trusted him to stand against an encroaching darkness, a coalition of alien races that claimed to bring peace but harbored betrayal in their hearts. The coalition's deception struck like a blade in the dark. Promises of alliance turned to ashes as his people were left vulnerable, their defenses shattered by an enemy emboldened by the coalition's silent consent. The warrior king fought valiantly, leading his soldiers until the final breath of resistance was extinguished. But even kings bleed, and in the end, he fell, abandoned on a barren, toxic planet by those who once sought his counsel. The planet was desolation incarnate. Jagged landscapes stretched endlessly under a crimson sky, the air thick with poisonous vapors. Wounded and weary, the warrior king lay amidst the ruins of his escape pod, his breath shallow but defiant. The coalition had declared him a liability, a relic of a forgotten war. Their decision to abandon him was masked by the cold rationale of resource allocation. Better to let nature finish what war could not, they had reasoned. To them, his survival was a matter unworthy of concern. Days passed in a haze of pain and despair. The warrior king, for all his strength, began to succumb to the planet's hostility. Each moment felt like a prolonged execution, a grim testament to the galaxy's indifference. He closed his eyes, preparing to meet the void, when an unexpected signal broke through the haze, a faint hum of hope amidst the deafening silence of the wasteland. A human ship, small and unassuming, appeared on the horizon. It was far from the technological marvels that cruised the galaxy's elite sectors. Its hull bore the scars of countless voyages, a testament to its crew's resilience rather than their resources. To the Galactic Council, humans were insignificant, a fledgling species fumbling through the cosmos with primitive tools and naive aspirations. Yet, against all logic, they had come. The crew had detected the faint distress signal from the warrior king's pod, a signal others had ignored or dismissed. Protocol dictated they should report the anomaly and move on, especially given the planet's hazardous conditions. But humanity had always been an anomaly in the galaxy, a species that acted first with its heart, often to its own detriment. The warrior king, barely conscious, was dimly aware of their arrival. Their voices were a mix of urgency and determination as they assessed his condition. To his weakened mind, their actions were perplexing. They had nothing to gain, no alliances to secure, no debts to repay. Yet they moved with purpose, stabilizing him and preparing to evacuate. Their decision was met with internal resistance. "This is madness," one of them muttered, pointing out the risks. But the leader, a woman with eyes that burned with quiet resolve, silenced the dissent. "We don't leave people behind," she said simply. Her words, though spoken softly, echoed with a conviction that pierced through the warrior king's pain. As they lifted off the planet, the warrior king opened his eyes briefly to regard his unlikely saviors. They were not what he expected of a species so often dismissed by the galaxy. There was no grandeur in their appearance, no aura of superiority. Yet, in their actions, he glimpsed something he had not seen in years, a flicker of compassion, an unyielding defiance against apathy. For the first time in a long while, the warrior king allowed himself a sliver of hope. In his darkest hour, when all others had turned their backs, it was the least expected of allies who had reached out a hand. Humans, the so-called lesser species, had chosen bravery over protocol, compassion over indifference. And as the toxic planet faded into the void, the warrior king knew that the galaxy's dismissal of humanity was its greatest oversight. These humans, unassuming yet extraordinary, might just be capable of something greater than the galaxy had ever dared to imagine. The warrior king awoke to the sound of hurried voices, unfamiliar and oddly gentle, in stark contrast to the chaotic roars of battle he was accustomed to. His vision was blurred, but even through his daze, he could sense their proximity. They were small, fragile-looking creatures, speaking in clipped but purposeful tones. A rush of indignation surged through him. These were humans. the insignificant species the galaxy barely acknowledged, and they dared to approach him as if they were equals. He tried to rise, a towering figure of muscle and scars, but his injuries betrayed him. One of the humans stepped forward, attempting to steady him. He bared his teeth, a guttural growl escaping his lips. "Do not touch me," he hissed. His voice, though weakened, carried the weight of command. The humans paused, their expressions a mixture of concern and caution. Their leader, the woman with piercing eyes, knelt beside him, unflinching. "You're hurt, and this planet will kill you faster than your pride. Let us help, or you won't live to argue." The audacity of her tone caught him off guard. He glared at her, searching for deceit, but her gaze held firm. Reluctantly, he allowed them to tend to his wounds, though his body remained tense, every fiber of his being ready to strike if they showed the slightest hint of betrayal. As they worked, the contrast between them became starkly apparent. They were smaller, their frames unassuming, their tools primitive by galactic standards. Yet there was a precision in their movements, a quiet determination that hinted at something deeper. They moved without fear, despite his intimidating presence, and their voices, though calm, carried an urgency born of necessity rather than panic. The first hours together were marked by unspoken tension. The warrior king, a veteran of countless battles, trusted no one, least of all these fragile beings. He assumed their motives were self-serving. Perhaps they sought to curry favor with his enemies or planned to use him as leverage. When he voiced these suspicions, the humans responded with an honesty that disarmed him. "You think we're here for gain?" one of them said, exasperation evident in their tone. "We're here because you were dying, and we couldn't stand by and do nothing. That's it. No schemes, no hidden agendas." The simplicity of their answer was almost insulting. Compassion, for its own sake, was an alien concept to him. Still, he watched them closely as they worked to repair their damaged equipment and plan their next move. Their actions spoke louder than their words, and though his instincts screamed at him to remain wary, a small part of him began to wonder if their intentions were as pure as they claimed. The planet was merciless, its environment an unrelenting enemy. Deadly storms swept across the barren landscape, and nocturnal predators, drawn by the scent of blood, prowled the shadows. The humans faced these dangers head-on, their resourcefulness on full display. When a storm threatened to engulf their temporary shelter, they constructed a makeshift barrier from the wreckage of their ship. When a predator attacked in the night, they worked as a unit to drive it away, their weapons crude but effective. The warrior king watched in silence, his skepticism giving way to a grudging respect. These humans, despite their apparent frailty, possessed an unyielding spirit. They adapted quickly, turning their weaknesses into strengths. They lacked the advanced technology of other races, yet their ingenuity allowed them to survive where others would have faltered. The turning point came during one of the planet's violent storms. The winds tore through their camp, threatening to scatter their supplies into the abyss. The warrior king, still too weak to stand, could only watch as the humans scrambled to secure their equipment. In the chaos, one of them, a young man with a determined expression, risked his life to retrieve a vital piece of gear. The winds howled, debris flew like shrapnel, and for a moment, it seemed certain the human would be lost. But he returned, battered and bloodied, clutching the equipment to his chest. The warrior king stared at him, unable to comprehend such recklessness. "Why would you risk yourself for something so trivial?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the storm's aftermath. The human looked at him, breathless but resolute. "It's not trivial. Without this, we lose our chance to get off this rock. And if I have to bleed a little to make sure we all survive, then so be it." The simplicity of the answer struck the warrior king like a blow. In his world, sacrifice was a calculated act, measured against the cost of failure. But for these humans, it was a natural extension of their character. They protected each other without hesitation, driven not by duty or obligation, but by a profound sense of unity. As the days wore on, the warrior king found himself drawn to their way of thinking. He still harbored doubts, but each passing moment chipped away at his resistance. These humans were unlike any species he had encountered. They were not the weaklings the galaxy dismissed, nor were they naive idealists. They were survivors, bound together by an unshakable belief in the value of life. For the first time in years, the warrior king began to see the galaxy not as a web of alliances and betrayals, but as a place where courage and compassion could thrive. And though he would never admit it aloud, he felt a growing sense of gratitude toward the humans who had risked everything to save him. The fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows against the rocky walls of their temporary shelter. The humans huddled close, their faces weary but determined. The warrior king sat apart, his massive frame a silent presence, his eyes fixed on the dancing flames. Despite the tension that lingered between them, the shared firelight created an unspoken bond. It was a moment of reprieve, a fragile peace in the midst of chaos. One of the humans, a young woman with an earnest gaze, began to speak, her voice soft but steady. She told the story of her home, of a planet once lush and thriving, now struggling under the weight of its own ambition. She spoke of disasters, wars, and loss, her words painting a picture of a species that had faced destruction but refused to succumb. "We've made mistakes," she admitted. "But we keep fighting, not because we're perfect, but because giving up isn't an option." The warrior king listened, his expression unreadable. Her words stirred something within him, a memory of his own people. They too had fought against impossible odds, only to be betrayed by those they trusted. He spoke then, his voice low and heavy with bitterness, recounting the fall of his kingdom. He spoke of alliances forged in blood, only to be discarded when they were no longer convenient. The betrayal of the Galactic Coalition still burned in his veins, a wound deeper than any physical scar. "Your kind is young," he said finally, his tone edged with skepticism. "You speak of survival, yet you lack the strength to endure true betrayal. Your optimism will be your undoing." The human leader, the woman with the piercing eyes, met his gaze. "Strength isn't just about enduring," she replied. "It's about adapting. About finding a way to rebuild, even when everything seems lost." Their conversation was interrupted by a burst of static from the communication device the humans had salvaged. It was damaged, its circuits fried by the planet's hostile environment. The warrior king watched with a mix of curiosity and disbelief as the humans set to work repairing it. Their tools were rudimentary: worn wires, scavenged components, a knife that had seen better days. Yet they worked with precision, their hands moving deftly, their voices calm and focused. In his own society, technology was a thing of perfection, built to last and rarely requiring repair. To see these humans improvise, coaxing life out of scraps, was a revelation. "You treat broken things as if they're precious," he remarked, unable to hide his astonishment. One of the humans grinned, a hint of pride in his expression. "We don't have the luxury of throwing things away. If it's broken, we fix it. If it's lost, we rebuild it. That's how we've made it this far." The device sputtered to life, emitting a faint signal. It wasn't much, but it was enough to restore a glimmer of hope. The warrior king found himself impressed, though he said nothing. In their ingenuity, he saw a resilience that transcended their physical limitations. They were resourceful, adaptable, and fiercely determined, a combination that was as surprising as it was admirable. The night deepened, and the humans continued to share their stories. They spoke of sacrifices made for the greater good, of loved ones lost in the pursuit of survival. Their leader told of a decision she once faced: to abandon a comrade to ensure the safety of her team or to risk everything to save them. She had chosen the latter, and though it cost them dearly, she had no regrets. "You could have chosen the safer path," the warrior king said, his tone almost accusatory. "You could have left me behind as well." The leader's eyes softened, her expression unwavering. "We don't measure lives by convenience. If saving one means risking all, we take that risk. Because what's the point of surviving if we lose our humanity along the way?" Her words lingered in the air, heavy with conviction. The warrior king found himself questioning his own beliefs, the rigid codes that had governed his life. His people valued honor and strength, but they had also been quick to abandon those who could no longer serve a purpose. In these humans, he saw a different kind of strength, a moral courage that refused to bend, even in the face of adversity. In the days that followed, the humans began to teach him their survival tactics. They showed him how to make tools from scraps, how to navigate the planet's treacherous terrain using natural markers. At first, he was skeptical, dismissing their methods as primitive. But as he practiced their techniques, he realized their practicality. What they lacked in sophistication, they made up for in effectiveness. In return, he shared his battle strategies, recounting the tactics that had led his armies to victory. He spoke of discipline, of the importance of unity in the face of chaos. The humans listened intently, finding parallels in their own history. They spoke of ancient wars, of leaders who had inspired their people to rise above their limitations. Through these exchanges, they began to understand each other not as alien and human, but as warriors bound by the same principles. Laughter, once absent, began to echo through their camp. The humans, despite their dire circumstances, found moments of humor in the absurdity of their situation. The warrior king, initially stoic, found himself smiling, an expression foreign to his battle-hardened face. Their warmth was infectious, breaking down the walls of mistrust that had kept him at a distance. As they prepared for the next leg of their journey, the warrior king felt a sense of camaraderie he hadn't experienced in years. These humans, with their flawed tools and fragile bodies, had shown him a strength that was both profound and humbling. In their perseverance, he saw a reflection of the leader he once aspired to be, a leader who fought not just for survival, but for the ideals that gave life meaning. And for the first time since his betrayal, he began to believe that perhaps hope was not a weakness, but a strength worth fighting for. The faint hum of an incoming transmission broke the fragile calm of their camp. It was intercepted on a barely functional device, but the message was clear enough: the Galactic Coalition had discovered the Warrior King's survival. The tone was clinical, devoid of emotion, as the transmission detailed their orders. A small fleet was en route, tasked with eliminating him and anyone aiding his escape. There would be no negotiation, no mercy. The humans exchanged tense glances. Their ship, patched together and barely operational, was no match for the Coalition's advanced technology. They had limited resources, makeshift weapons, and no reinforcements. Yet, as the gravity of their situation settled over them, their leader stood tall, her resolve unshaken. "We don't abandon our own," she said firmly, her gaze sweeping across her crew and the warrior king. "We stand, or we fall together." The warrior king watched them in silence. He had faced countless battles, stared death in the face more times than he could count. But this was different. These humans, outmatched and outgunned, were choosing to fight not because they had any chance of victory, but because they refused to yield. Their courage stirred something deep within him, a memory of the leader he had once been. The humans quickly began formulating a plan, their resourcefulness on full display. The planet itself would become their ally. Its toxic atmosphere and unpredictable storms, so hostile to life, could be harnessed as weapons against the Coalition's ships. They identified a narrow canyon where the fleet would likely land. It was a natural choke point, perfect for an ambush. The warrior king observed their discussions, impressed by their strategic thinking. "You intend to use the terrain against them," he said, a hint of approval in his tone. "That is bold. But their technology will still give them an advantage." The leader turned to him, her expression resolute. "Advantage or not, we make them fight on our terms. They won't expect resistance from a lesser species. That's our edge." The warrior king nodded, a rare flicker of admiration crossing his face. These humans were unlike any warriors he had known. They relied not on overwhelming strength, but on cleverness, adaptability, and an unyielding spirit. When the enemy fleet arrived, the humans were ready. The Coalition's ships descended into the canyon, their sleek forms bristling with weapons. From their vantage points, the humans launched their ambush. They had rigged sections of the canyon walls with explosives fashioned from salvaged materials, creating a cascade of rock and debris that buried one ship before it could fire a single shot. The toxic air, manipulated with crude but effective dispersal devices, forced the Coalition soldiers to don protective gear, slowing their movements. The warrior king joined the fray, his combat instincts reignited. Though weakened, he moved with precision and ferocity, cutting down enemies with a blade fashioned from scavenged metal. He fought not as a commander directing troops, but as an equal alongside the humans, his towering presence a rallying point for their defense. The coalition, though caught off guard, adapted quickly. Their superior firepower began to wear down the humans' defenses. Yet the humans pressed on, their determination unwavering. They set traps, used hit-and-run tactics, and leveraged every ounce of ingenuity to keep the enemy at bay. One human, severely injured, refused to retreat, continuing to provide cover fire until their position was secure. Their bravery was matched only by their resourcefulness. In the heat of battle, the warrior king found himself marveling at their resolve. These were not the weaklings the galaxy dismissed. They were warriors of a different kind, their strength lying not in physical dominance but in their unbreakable will. He realized then that he had underestimated them, just as the coalition had. As the skirmish raged on, the coalition fleet began to falter. One ship was disabled entirely when a human rigged an improvised explosive to its landing gear. Another was forced to retreat when a storm, predicted by the humans' careful observation of the planet's patterns, engulfed it in a violent surge of wind and debris. The humans' clever tactics turned the very environment into a weapon, equalizing the battle against impossible odds. The warrior king fought side by side with the humans, his movements synchronized with theirs as if they had trained together for years. He found himself trusting them completely, a feeling he had not experienced in a long time. They covered each other's backs, moved as one unit, and adapted seamlessly to the shifting battlefield. For the first time since his betrayal, he felt a sense of unity that went beyond mere survival. When the final coalition ship retreated, limping away in defeat, the humans collapsed with exhaustion, their bodies battered but their spirits unbroken. The warrior king stood among them, his chest heaving from exertion, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the enemy had fled. He turned to the human leader, his voice heavy with newfound respect. "You have defied the galaxy itself," he said. "Not with superior strength, but with courage, ingenuity, and an unshakable belief in one another. I once believed humanity to be insignificant. I see now that I was blind." The leader smiled faintly, her face streaked with dirt and sweat. "We're not perfect," she replied, "but we fight for what matters. And that's something no fleet or empire can take away." The warrior king nodded, the weight of his old prejudices falling away. He had been wrong about these humans. They were not weak. They were extraordinary. And as he stood among them, battered but victorious, he realized that they had not only saved his life but had reignited a belief he thought he had lost, a belief in the strength of unity and the power of hope. The battered escape vessel broke through the planet's atmosphere, carrying its weary occupants into the safety of the void. The humans sat in silence, their expressions a mixture of relief and sorrow. The cost of their victory was etched into every face: bruises, bandages, and empty seats where comrades once sat. The warrior king, seated among them, felt the weight of their sacrifice more acutely than he had ever felt his own. He glanced at the human leader, her arm in a sling but her gaze steady as she piloted the ship. "Your people have paid dearly," he said, his voice thick with a rare vulnerability. "All for a stranger." She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "We didn't do it for you," she replied softly. "We did it because it was the right thing to do." The simplicity of her words struck him like a blow. He thought of the allies who had turned their backs on him, the Galactic Council's cold pragmatism. These humans, with their flawed ship and limited resources, had shown more honor and integrity than the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. As the ship hurtled toward a safe haven, he vowed that their sacrifices would not be in vain. After weeks of healing and preparation, the warrior king returned to the Galactic Council. His towering presence commanded silence as he stepped into the chamber, flanked by representatives of his people. The wounds he bore were still visible, a stark testament to his ordeal. Yet, his gaze was no longer filled with bitterness but with purpose. The council members shifted uneasily as he began to speak. He recounted his betrayal, sparing no detail of their abandonment, and the justification they had used to leave him to die. His voice carried the weight of his anger but also a newfound clarity. "You deemed me expendable," he said, his tone cutting through the air. "But it was not your advanced fleets or mighty coalitions that saved me. It was a species you have dismissed as primitive. Humans." Gasps rippled through the chamber. He continued, his voice steady and resolute. "They came for me, not because of politics or alliances, but because they valued life. They fought for me, not out of obligation, but because they believed it was right. Their courage, their ingenuity, their humanity, these are the qualities the galaxy has underestimated for far too long." The council erupted into murmurs, but the warrior king silenced them with a raised hand. "Humanity has shown us what we have forgotten, that strength is not measured by technology or power but by the principles we uphold. They are the moral compass the galaxy needs. And I will stand with them." The repercussions of his words were immediate and profound. News of humanity's actions spread across the galaxy, igniting debates among other species. The story of a lesser species standing against the coalitions might inspire awe and admiration. Slowly, perceptions began to shift. Where once humans were seen as insignificant, they were now regarded as brave, resourceful, and uniquely principled. Ambassadors from other species reached out to humanity, seeking alliances and learning from their ways. The humans, for their part, remained humble. They brushed off the accolades with quiet dignity, insisting they had only done what any sentient being should do. Their humility only deepened the respect they garnered, solidifying their place in the galactic stage as unlikely but undeniable leaders. The warrior king returned to his people, forever changed by his experience. He adopted many of the principles he had learned from the humans, infusing his leadership with a newfound empathy and trust. He began fostering alliances not based on power but on shared values, building bridges between species that had long been divided. His kingdom, once fractured and betrayed, began to heal under his guidance. In a ceremonial gesture that surprised the galaxy, the warrior king declared humanity honorary allies of his people. He pledged eternal friendship between their species, a bond forged not by politics but by mutual respect and shared ideals. The declaration was met with celebrations on both sides, a rare moment of unity in a galaxy often marred by division. As time passed, the warrior king found himself reflecting often on the humans who had saved him. He thought of their leader, her steady gaze and unwavering resolve. He thought of the crew who had fought and bled for him, driven not by duty but by an unshakable belief in doing what was right. He thought of their world, fragile yet vibrant, a testament to their ability to persevere against all odds. In his private moments, he would gaze out at the stars, his mind turning over the possibilities. "Humanity," he mused aloud one evening. "You may be young among the stars, but your spirit is ancient. You remind us of what we have forgotten, of what we could yet become." The galaxy, once a cold and indifferent place, began to feel a little brighter. Humanity's actions had set in motion a ripple effect, inspiring other species to rethink their priorities and values. Cooperation replaced rivalry in places long ruled by conflict. Hope, once scarce, began to take root. And as the warrior king looked toward the future, he knew that humanity's story was far from over. They were not just survivors, they were architects of something greater. Their journey had only begun, and he was honored to walk alongside them. In the end, the warrior king realized that his legacy was no longer defined by betrayal or defeat. It was rewritten by the hands of those who refused to abandon him, by the courage of a species the galaxy had overlooked. Humanity had shown him, and the stars themselves, that even in the face of overwhelming odds, there was always a reason to fight, to hope, and to believe.